Hey everyone, this is Ryan King and welcome to my very first Blender tutorial where I'm going to be showing you guys how to make the Ring of Power from Lord of the Rings in Blender. We're going to be using Blender version 2.81, which is the current stable version. Before we start, you're going to need 3 resources online. So the first resource that you're going to need is this texture on Pixabay. You can use a different texture if you want. I'm using this texture in the tutorial for the ground underneath the ring, so if you want to go download that, you can. There will be a link in the video description. And the other thing you're going to need is this HDRI. Again, you can use a different HDRI, but this is the one I'm going to be using in the tutorial to give some realistic lighting. Both of these resources are free, so you can just download them. So just download the 1K version of the Pillars HDRI, and then you can just download this texture from Pixabay. And the one other thing you're going to need is this elfish writing texture that we're going to be putting on the ring to give it that cool writing. So this link will also be in the video description, so go download that. Now if you're a complete beginner to Blender and you've never used it before, you should probably go do a beginner tutorial. But if you just know the basics of Blender, this tutorial is geared towards beginners, not complete beginners, but if you're just a beginner to Blender and you know kind of the basic things, the basic shortcut keys, then this tutorial should be great for you. So I'll just delete everything, and now I'm going to press Shift A and add a circle. I'll zoom into that circle and we'll tab into edit mode. I'm just going to extrude this out and up like that on the Z axis. And then I'll select everything, press G and Z, and just pull everything up like that. So now let's add a mirror modifier. So I'll go over to this wrench right here, click on add modifier, and we're just going to add the mirror modifier like that. And then let's check the axis to be the Z axis. The Z axis, the Z axis, and click on clipping as well, as that will merge vertices together that are connecting, because we want the top and the bottom to merge together. So now if we go back into edit mode, we can press G and Z and just pull this down like that. Let me turn on my screencast keys. I almost forgot that. So you can see what I'm clicking right here with my screencast keys. I want to make the inside of the ring. So I'm going to deselect everything and use Alt, hold down Alt and click on this edge right here. And then I'll press E and then right click so it'll bump back to its default position, and then press S and just scale it in. So we're just going to scale it in like that and just scale it to however thick you want the ring to be. And then I'll press E and Z and pull it down, and then those will connect like that. So now you can see we've got our ring. It's pretty chunky right now, but we're going to smooth it out later. So let's just recalculate the normals, because the normals are flipped in the wrong direction. So we'll double tap A and we'll press Shift N, and that'll recalculate the normals. That's very important in the future when we're doing like shading and stuff. It'll look proper. So now let's go into object mode. So now let's add a subdivision surface modifier. So I'm going to go to add modifier and just click on subdivision surface like that. And now let's just set the render and viewport both to 2, and so that'll kind of smooth it out more. Let's shade it smooth, so we can just go to object and click on shade smooth like that. So now it's nice and smoothed out. And now I do want the edge to be a bit like coming out a little bit, so I'm going to tab into edit mode and just alt click on this edge right here and just press S and scale it out so it just kind of has some thickness. So now let's add the ground plane. So I'm going to press Shift A and just add a plane, and we can just scale this plane up like this. And now we want the ring to be resting on it. Let's make it a little bit bigger actually, something like that. And then let's click on our ring, and we're going to press G and Z and just pull it up so it's just resting on the ground plane. You can go underneath the plane and press G and Z, G for grab, Z for the Z axis, and just pull it up just to like that. There we go. So now it's just resting on the ground. And so now let's add a camera so we can actually look through our camera and see what it's going to look like. So let's press Shift A and we'll just add a camera right there. Now I can move my view to wherever I want, and then I can, once I've have it set up, I think I want the camera to be about there, I can press Control Alt 0 and that'll jump the camera to wherever we are. So now we're in the camera, and I can press 0 and that'll go out of the camera, and if I press 0 on the number pad, it'll jump back. So if I click right here, you can see now the camera is selected, And now I can press G and just move it around to where I want. And it's too close right now, so I'm going to press G and then double tap Z. And then that way I can pull it forward and backwards. And I can just move it around. If I want to kind of rotate it with the camera selected, I can double tap R and then I can just move it around. And I can hold down Shift and then do more micro adjustments and just move it around to wherever I want. So I'll just move this to how I like it. Now I do want this ring to be a little bit thicker because I feel like it's just not quite as thick as I want it. So I'll tab back into edit mode and I'll just select these two rings by pressing Alt and then clicking on this ring, then holding down Shift and pressing Alt and clicking on this ring, and that'll select that ring of vertices, and then I'll press S to scale. And I don't want it to scale on the Z-axis, so up and down. I just want it to scale in, so I'll press Shift-Z after I've pressed S, and then that will scale it on the X and Y, but not on the Z-axis, so not up and down. So I'll just scale it just a little bit thicker. So now it's a little bit thicker, and then I do want it to just be a little bit higher up, so I can just select everything and press S and Z and just make it a little bit thicker. Okay, so now we can start setting up our lighting. First, let's just save our project. Control S to save, or you can go File and click on Save. Just save it somewhere on your hard drive. I'm just going to save it in a folder, and I'm going to call it the Ring of Power. Okay, and now I've saved that, just so that if Blender crashes or anything, we won't lose it. Now let's set up the lighting. So I'm going to add that HDRI that I was talking about, and that will give lighting all around, and that'll give some really realistic reflections and really realistic lighting. So to do that, I'm going to click on the world, and we can edit the world properties here. And instead of this gray color, I'm going to click on this circle right here and click on environment texture, and this is where we added the HDRI. So now I'll just click on open. Okay, so here's my pillars 1K HDR, so I'm just going to click on that and add it in. And now if we go to rendered mode by pressing Z and moving our mouse up, you can see now if you just move around and zoom out, you can see now it's added in the HDRI. And that's going to give some really nice reflections to the shiny ring. So let's go back into the camera view. Now I don't really care for it to render all of this area. I just want it to render where the camera can see. So to do that, I'll press Control B and then click and drag over the camera what the camera's seeing, and then just let go. And now it's just going to render what's inside the camera, and that'll speed up render times and preview times. I want this HDRI to be not as bright as it is. I want it to be kind of a dark atmosphere, so I'm going to set the strength to 0.1, and that'll just make it a lot darker. Now right now it does look too dark, but we're going to add another light and just shine it on it, and that'll just be really nice. But that HDRI is still going to give some really nice reflections and make it look a lot more realistic. Now before I forget, I just want to make sure that the color management settings are set to filmic. Click on the render settings right here and go down to color management and just open that up. Make sure it's set to filmic. It should be on default, so just make it sure it's set to filmic, and that's just going to give it more realistic colors, and it's going to make it look more photorealistic. And then the look right here, I'm just going to set this to high contrast, and that'll kind of bump out the colors a little bit and kind of make it look a bit more colorful and nice. Okay, and then let's add in our main lighting. So I'm just going to go back into solid view, and I'll press Shift A, and I will add a plane. And let's just move this plane up like this, and let's tab into edit mode and scale it on the X-axis and just pull it out. We're going to just kind of make a long strip, and then we're going to tell it that it's going to emit light, so it'll be our light source. So just like that, and then I'll just rotate it and scale it, and I'll press 7 on the number pad to go to top view and just move it kind of over like this, so it'll be shining light on this side of it. Just give it a little bit more room, and then I can just scale it down, move it up a little bit, and then rotate it. And I can actually double tap R, and that'll kind of give it more rotation. And so I can just make it so it's facing the ring. So I'll click on this right here, and that's the material tab. And now we can click on new material, and I can just call this material light. And now instead of it being a principled BSDF, I'm going to change it to emission. Right there, emission. So now it'll be emitting light. So now if we go to rendered mode, you can see now it's emitting light. And I'm going to make this a lot brighter, so the strength is going to be set to 50. And now it's giving a lot of light. You can see it's just looking really nice now. And so if we go back into our camera view now, we can see it's nicely lit. Everything looks white right now, but we'll add materials soon. Now the color, I want it to be a very slightly yellowy color, just because that just makes it look a lot nicer. So I'm just going to make it a kind of an orangey, yellowish color, just slightly. Our lighting's done. Let's just save this again by pressing Control S and saving that. You can see it's saved. And now we can start adding our materials. Let's just click on the plane and we'll start setting up the materials for that first. I am going to click on this shading tab right here, and that'll bring us to a shading workflow. So now I'm just going to move some things around a bit. So I don't really need these. This is like the file browser, and this is like a UV editor. I don't really need these side panel things, so I'm just gonna remove them. So to do that, I'll just click right here and it'll have that little X kind of thing, and I'll click and pull out and it'll have an arrow, and then I'll pull back the other way and it'll have the arrow going the opposite direction, and then I'll let go and that'll remove that. I'll click on this and do the same thing, so pull it out, pull it back, and then let go, and then it'll be gone. So now we just have the node set up right here for our materials, and then we have the preview. So I'll go into the camera view and make sure the ground is selected and click on new to add a new material. Let's just call this ground, just ground like that. And now we need to add in that texture that I was talking about at the starting. So if you haven't already, you can go and download this. It's just free. There will be a link in the video description. You can download that or use another one if you have something else you want to use. We can press Shift A, click on search, and we can just add an image texture. So just start typing in image texture, click on that, and just drop it right here, right next to the principled shader. And now we will click on open. We're going to open that texture. Here's mine right here. You can just open that image. The other thing that you can do is you can just go to your file browser and you can drag the material, or you can drag the texture into the nodes, and then you can just drop it and that'll add it in automatically. So if you want to do that too, I usually just do that because it's really easy. And now what we want to do is we want to connect the color to the base color of our material. So here's our material, this is the texture. We're going to take this color and we're going to wire it up to the base color, and now that's telling it that we're going to use that texture for the color. Now the texture is blown out way too much, it's way too big. We want to make it a lot smaller, so just click on the UV editing, and now we can edit the texture to be where we want it to be. Press Z and just move my mouse down, and then we can go to the material preview, and now we can see how that texture is being displayed. So right now it's actually stretching it a little bit or squishing it, so I want to UV unwrap it. So I will press U and then click on unwrap. So now I'm unwrapping it, and you can see these 4 points right here are being displayed right here on the texture. So wherever wherever the geometry is, that's going to be shown up right here, and you can see where it's displaying it. So now if I just scale this and I move it around, you can see it's displaying the texture differently on our plane. I'll press 0 to go into the camera view, and that way we can just preview what we're going to see, and then we can just scale this, we can rotate it, we can move it around. So now I'm just going to move it to somewhere where I like. Something like that's pretty good. I like that. You can change it however you want, but I like that. So now I'll go back into the shading tab so we can work with our shading stuff. Let's go into rendered mode by clicking right here. So I want to add some bumpiness to our kind of papery ground, because right now it just kind of looks really flat. So to do that, I'm going to use this normal. So first I'll press Shift A and go to search, and we'll just add a bump node, and we'll just put the bump node right here. And then I will take this color of this image and I'll drop it down here into the height. And so we're going to tell it that the light and dark values of that texture is going to be used to make it more bumpy. And then the bump node is just converting it so that the normal can understand it. So if we take this normal and we put it in the normal here of the principled BSDF, you can see now, if you look right here, you can see it's all bumpy. And right now the strength is like way too high, so I'm just going to set the strength to like maybe 0.15. So now it's a lot more subtle. You could do maybe 0.2. I'm going to add in another bump node. So I'll click on the bump node. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it. So now we have another one. And I'm going to drop it in between this connection between the normal and the bump. And if we drop it right here, it automatically connects it up. Now I'm going to add a noise texture to give it more bumpiness. A noise texture, click on that, and we can just drop it right down here. Now let's take the color and let's drop the color into the height like that. And now I do want to use a Blender add-on which is already installed in Blender. You just need to enable it. So to do that, go to Preferences, and we're going to be enabling the Node Wrangler add-on. It's a really great add-on. It's just built into Blender. So if you click on add-ons right here, you can click on this and start typing in Node Wrangler. I already have it installed, so if you just click on that checkbox, it'll be installed. If you want to save your preferences and have the Node Wrangler always be in all of your Blender files when you open them up, you can just save the preferences, and then when you open up a new Blender scene, it'll already be enabled. I love the Node Wrangler. I use it all the time, so I just keep it on. So now that the Node Wrangler is enabled, we can use it. So to use it, we will press Control and Shift at the same time, and then click on one of the nodes. And what that does is it gives us a preview of what the node looks like. So now we can Control Shift click on this, and you can see now it'll just show the texture here. You can Control Shift click on this, and it'll just show the bump right there. So I want to Control Shift click on the noise texture, and you can see what the noise texture is going to look like. So right now the scale is way too big. We want to scale it a lot smaller. I'm going to scale it maybe around to 80 or something. And now we can Control Shift click on the principled BSDF, and now you can see that looks a lot better. One more thing that I do want to do is I want to make the color darker, because right now it's pretty bright and I feel like it's going to take away from the focal element, which is the ring. So just search for RGB curves and then drop this in between the color and the base color. And this node will allow us to edit the colors. So I'm just going to take this curve and just move it down a bit, and that'll just make it a bit darker. So you can see if we go way down, it'll make it really dark. That's too dark though, so I'm just going to make it like that. Okay, I like that. So now we can finally do the material for the ring. So just click on the ring, click new, and we can just call this ring. Caps lock on. Ring. There we go. Okay. And now this ring is it's metal, so it's shiny. So we want to tell it that it's going to be metal. So turn this metallic value all the way up to 1. And then let's turn the roughness down to maybe 0.2, so it's a bit more shiny. And now you can really see the benefit of that HDRI, because all these reflections right here, this like white thing and the blue thing right there, this is really going to make it look a lot more realistic. The ring is kind of like a gold material, or it's kind of a gold color, so let's change the base color to a bit of a golden color. So now we need to add the elfish writing on our ring. So let's first grab the elfish writing texture, which again will be in the video description, and drop it in like that. But now what we want to do is we want the writing to be glowing, because the words are glowing, but we want the rest of the ring to be a shiny like gold material. So we are going to have 2 shaders. So to mix those 2 shaders together, we're going to press Shift A and add a mix shader. Just like that. So drop the mix shader right in there and pull this up, and now the other shader is going to be an emission. So press Shift A, go to search, and search for emission. Drop the emission in there, and then you can take the emission and stick it into the shader. Where the letters are, it's going to be glowing, and where the letters aren't, we're going to have gold. So to do that, we're going to take this elfish writing texture and we're going to plug the color into the factor, and so that way it'll tell it, you know, this part is going to be glowing, this part is going to be the gold. And so right now it doesn't really do anything other than make it all shiny or make it all glowing, and that's because we need to UV unwrap. Just like we UV unwrap the ground, we need to UV unwrap the texture of the elfish writing onto the ring. So I'll show you how to do that. So we need to apply the mirror modifier because we don't want the texture to be mirrored. So just go over here And this is the mirror modifier. Click apply, and then if we tab into edit mode, you can see now it's not mirrored, it's just all there. So we're going to be UV unwrapping this ring so that we can place the elfish writing where we want. So to do that, we're going to add seams. So to get a sense of like how UV unwrapping works, kind of think of the ring as paper, and then think of taking a pair of scissors and cutting the ring out, and then like placing it flat on this material. So how we're going to do this is tap into edit mode, and first I just want to cut the ring open, so I'm going to press Alt and just click on this ring right here, and I'll press Control E and I'll mark a seam. So we're adding a seam or a cut in the ring. So now I'm going to add 2 more cuts, so I'll deselect everything and Alt click on here and press Control E and mark seam. And then I'll do that one more time on the bottom. So I'm just going to move down here, look at the bottom of the ring, make sure everything is deselected, and then just Alt click on this ring of vertices and press Control E and mark seam. So now wherever those red seams are going to be, that's where it's going to be cut when we UV unwrap it. So I'll select everything now and press U, and then we will click on unwrap. And so that unwraps it. So now you can see it's giving us a look of those different vertices, and it's showing us where they're cut out. So you can see we have 2 different ones. We have this one right here and we have this one right here. So now if we move our mouse over this and press L, you can see it'll select all the linked vertices. These vertices are everything around, like inside and stuff. This is what we don't want to show the lettering on the elfish writing. So we'll just press S and scale it down, and we'll press G and just put it in this white area. And you can see where it's being UV unwrapped, you can see there's the writing. So we'll just move it over here because we don't want any of the writing to be on this area. And then we'll deselect everything and then press L and select this strip right here. And we will rotate it by pressing R and then pressing 90, so 90 degrees. So it's rotating it over like this. And then we'll press S and scale it out. And now you can see this, these planes right here are these planes right here. Now we can just scale these and move them around, and you can see now the writing is right there. Let's just move it to somewhere where we want. And also this cut right here, it's cutting into the words and messing it up. So I will just go back into object mode, press R to rotate, and then we'll press Z, and we'll just rotate that ring to a different area. So now we don't have to see the cut. So the cut's behind it. So now if we tab back into edit mode and just scale these, we can make the words bigger, smaller, just put them wherever we want and just make it look really nice. Now let's go back into our shading tab right here, and you can see it's kind of switched. So right now we have the words not glowing and the rest of the ring is the rest of the ring is glowing. So to fix that, we just need to swap these. So if we take this wire and we put it into this wire, that'll bump the other wire up, and now you can see it looks a lot better. So now the ring is shiny gold and the letters are glowing. So we want to make the words a lot brighter. So let's set the strength of the emission to 20. So that'll make it a lot stronger light. And then let's also set it to kind of a reddish, orangish, yellowish color. And that way when we add a glow to it, a glow effect, it'll make it kind of a orangey color. One other thing I do want to add before we get into the rendering and all that kind of stuff is I want to add a depth of field. And the depth of field really makes it feel more real, because we're going to it'll make it feel like the ring's kind of small, because we'll add a strong depth of field. So to do that, let's go back into our shading, or let's just go back into this mode, our not rendered mode, and we want to add an object, and we're going to tell the camera to focus on that object. So I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to add an empty plane axis. Now this won't be rendered. You can see it in the viewport, but it won't be rendered. So I'll just move this, scale it down, and just move it so it's just right here, kind of on the lip of the ring, and just kind of match it up so that it's really close. Like that. And actually we can go back into the layout, the default layout, and let's go back into just the normal view. And now we can just scale that down and just place it where you want the focus to be. So I want it to be right there. I think that kind of would look cool. Maybe just move it over a bit and then just move it up a bit like that. And now let's select our camera. So just click on the camera right here, go to the camera settings, and click on depth of field. Now the focus object will be the empty, so it's called empty, so we'll just select that. And then the f-stop, we can change this value to make it stronger depth of field. So if we go into the material preview mode by pressing Z and moving down, our mouse down, you can see now that we're in a material preview, and we can change this f-stop. So if we have it like 0.1, it's going to be really strong, so it kind of looks like a really small thing. I'm probably going to set it to 0.4. And that way it'll still be really blurred out here, but it'll be kind of nice and in focus right here. So this really makes it feel like it's a kind of a small ring. We're ready to set up our render settings. Let's just save this project again. And then let's go to our render settings. So right here's our render settings. Sampling, I'm going to set this to 300. If we go right here, you can see the resolution of the image. I'm just going to leave this at 1920 by 1080, so that's 1080p. I think that's a fine resolution. If you want to make it bigger, you can, or smaller. I'm just going to leave it like that. And now let's go to the light paths. So the light paths, if we turn these down, Blender won't have to calculate as many light paths, so it'll render quicker. So if we just go into rendered mode, like this, and I'm going to make the total just 1, the diffuse just 1, the glossy 1, and then the transparency, we don't have any transparency, so we can just turn that to 0. The transmission we can turn to 0, and then the reflective caustics and refractive caustics, we can turn both of those off. Those are just Blender calculating light paths and different things like that, and we can just turn those off, and that'll make the render a little bit faster. And one more thing before we start rendering, if you have a GPU, you can use that. I do have a GPU, so I'm going to render with that. But if you don't, then you can just use your CPU in your computer, and then you can press F12 or just go render and render image, and hopefully this won't take too long. So this is what it looks like. It's finished, and I'm just going to press escape and go out of that. It's still rendered, it's just I escaped. And now let's click on the compositing tab, and now let's click on use nodes, and you can see now this is our compositing. Now we're not doing any animation or anything, so I'm just going to close this timeline. So I'll just click right here, drag up, and then drag down, and then let go. And then I also don't need this side panel right here, so I'm just going to press N and close that. So now we can do some of our final adjustments and compositing and just make it look like a really nice image. So let's just pull this render layers back like this. And we can, using the node wrangler again, we can control shift and click, and that will give us a preview using the viewer. Also, you can just press shift A and search for viewer, the viewer node right there, but you can just do it that way with the node wrangler. So there's our image behind us. It does look a bit grainy, but we're going to add a denoise node that's just new in this new Blender version of Blender 2.81. It's a really great node, and it just helps to get away all that noise. So we're going to be using that. So you can press V, and that'll zoom out your backdrop image. And if, by the way, if you don't see it, it might be because you need to click on this. And then so V to zoom out, and then Alt V to zoom in. So I'm just going to make it like that. And now we can just see what the image is looking behind us while we're working. So now let's add the denoise add-on. So let's add the denoise node. So press Shift A and search for denoise right there, and then drop it into the composite right there, just right there, and then we can click on this and just drag it into the viewer. And now it's just going to take all that kind of graininess and it's just going to get rid of it. So there we go. It looks a lot nicer. As you can see, it's really smooth and nice. Let's add that glare. So I'm going to press Shift A and search for glare. We'll click on that and just drop it in right here, and then Control Shift and click so that the viewer is also looking at the glare. Let's set this glare to, let's set this to fog glow, and let's also set this to high quality. Now I do want to add a vignette on our image, and that just kind of makes it look a bit darker around the edges, and it kind of draws your eyes into the center of the image. So to do that, I'm going to press Shift A and I'm going to add a box mask, and we'll drop that in right there. And then if you Control Shift click on the box mask, you can preview and see what it looks like. So now I will change these values. Let me just scale this out like that so you can see it. So you can change the width and the height, and if you hold down Shift while you're changing those values, you can change them more slowly. And I'm just gonna move them up, and this will all make sense soon, but I'm just gonna make it just like that, so it's kind of this white box in this black background. So now I'll press Shift A, and we're gonna search for a blur node, and I'll drop this blur node right in there, and I will set this to 200 on both of these, so X and Y 200, and that will blur it out like really strongly. So now you can see it's really blurred out, and it's going to give it this vignette effect. And now we want to add these two things on top of each other. So to do that, I'm going to add an alpha over node. So I'll press Shift A, search for alpha over right there, and I'll drop it just right here. And now I'll take this blur and I'll drop it into the factor, and then I'll take this and put it into the viewer so we can see it. And the alpha over is mixing these two together. So it's saying this image is going to be mixed with this image. So if we take this image of our render layers and drop it in there, and then we mix it with this image, which is, we're just going to turn this to black. So just change this bottom one all the way to black. And then we're telling it the box mask with the blur, that's going to tell it where it's going to be black and where it's going to be the image. So now you can see it's actually the opposite, so we need to switch that. So just press Shift A and search for the invert node, and that'll invert the values. So we'll drop it right here right after the blur, and that'll invert it. So instead of it being black in the middle, it's going to be black on the edges. So now I just wait for that to composite. There we go. So now it looks a lot nicer. That looks really nice. It brings your eyes into the center of the scene. So that looks really cool. Now I want to do a tiny bit of color correction because I want to kind of pop out the colors and just make it look really nice. So to do that, I'll press Shift A and I'll add an RGB curves. So just drop the RGB curves node right there, right after the glare. And now we can play around with some of these values. So because it takes kind of a long time to composite all these things, I'm just going to mute some of these nodes. So I'll click on the glare and press M, and that'll just mute it. And then I'll click on the denoise and press M and mute it. And then I will Control Shift and click on the RGB curves, and now we can just much quicker change the color adjustment. So I'm going to kind of give it this kind of I'm going to take one and just move it up like this, and then take the other one and kind of move it down so it adds that kind of curves, and that'll kind of bump out the colors and make it look kind of nice. And then red, this is R for red. We can just bump the values a tiny bit up, just give it a little bit more red color, like that. And then the green, maybe just make it a tiny bit smaller, and maybe the blue can probably just stay how it is. And that kind of bumps the colors out a little bit. I think the red's a little bit too high. It's pretty subtle stuff. So there we go. And then we can just Control Shift click back on the alpha over. So that just kind of bumps the colors and makes it a bit nicer. Let's click on the glare and then M, press M again, and that'll unmute it, and then press on the denoise and press M again, and that'll unmute it. I think I want to make the lighting a little bit brighter because right now it's a little bit dark, so I'll just click back on the modeling, and I will just move this a little bit up and scale it out a little bit, and maybe just rotate it a little bit. And if we go into rendered mode, we can just see that's a bit better. Now, that's a bit brighter, so I'll just do that. If you want to re-render it, you can. I'll re-render it. If you just like how the lighting is, you can keep it. So I'll just re-render that again. Okay, it's done rendering again, and that definitely looks a lot better. So now I can just escape out of this. And if you're in the compositing here and you want to save your image, go right here, and we're going to go to the UV editor. And then just click right here, and we're going to click on viewer node, and that'll just show what the viewer is seeing. So we can press Shift S to save our image, and then we can just save it somewhere. So I'll just save it right here and call it the Ring of Power. And there we go. So that's the tutorial. I think this is the best result I got when I was doing this. So yeah, that's the tutorial, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you guys do make this and you post it online, post a link in the comments below with your result. I'd love to see it. And also post in the comments below who your favorite Lord of the Rings character is. I think Boromir is probably my favorite character. He's pretty cool. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. See you in another one. Bye!